Reynolds, the Chancellor with the Archdiocese of Louisville. Welcome to our podcast series, What's New in ArchLou. This show highlights the people and ministries of the Archdiocese, the Catholic Church in Central Kentucky. Join us each month as we welcome new guests and learn what's new in the Archdiocese as we invite you to get involved as you deepen your engagement with your Catholic faith. This program is brought to you by the ArchLou Podcast Network. Well, we've made it to almost the end of the summer. It's August. Today we have two guests who are going to help us get ready from the warm summer into what will probably be the warm fall. We have two guests. Father Bill Hammer is the pastor of St. Margaret Mary and St. William Parishes. And also our second guest is Jason Hall, who's the executive director of the Catholic Conference of Kentucky. Father Bill was ordained to the priesthood for the Archdiocese 45 years ago. You must have been 12, right? Yeah.
Yes, I was a young kid.
In addition to pastoring several parishes, Father Bill has served 2 times as the director of continuing education for clergy, as well as the director of the Office of Ecumenical and Interreligious Relations. He was served as president of the Priest Council. He sits on the College of Consultors. He also joins other community religious leaders as a regular panelist on a program you may be familiar with called Moral Side of the News, a local news show here in Louisville. Jason Hall is an attorney who began working with the Catholic Conference of Kentucky in 2011, and that came after serving a variety of positions in state government. Archbishop Kurtz appointed Jason as the executive director of CCK in 2014, so 10 years of that work, Jason. Jason and his wife, Jessica McFarland, are members of Holy Spirit Parish, the Newman Center in Lexington, Kentucky. First of all, welcome, both of you. Glad you could be here.
Thank you.
Thank you as well, yeah.
I give the formal bios, but it's always good to give you a chance to add a little bit more of your own, perhaps. How else can you introduce yourself to our listeners and viewers beyond the brief bios I shared? Jason, tell us what else you can tell you.
Thank you, Brian. Thanks for having me. I'm an attorney, and prior to my time with the conference, I worked with the legislature, and so I have that background as legislative staff in Frankfort. Also attended seminary for a time for the Diocese of Lexington, and so when I left seminary, this was kind of this role with the church kind of melded my two recent experiences, and so it's been a blessing for the last almost 14 years.
Very good.
Serving the conference.
Very good. Father Bill, a little more about you?
Well, a couple things maybe. I did do my study at Catholic University, attending a theological college, so in the center of the politics for 4 years of my life, and always observing what was going on, and has always created interest in me. I had a chance to go to a presidential inaugural ball. Happened to be up there. Yes, I was able to go one of the big public ones.
Yeah.
Jimmy Carter was elected president at that time, so I got to see him and Rosalind dance to A Rainy Night in Georgia.
Okay, there's a great trivia question.
Yes, it is.
That's
and
also
on the side, I have an avocation. I always explain it. I am a clown with makeup, as opposed to those who, lots of clowns out there who don't use makeup to be clowns.
There you go.
But in my case, I actually put the makeup on, and my clown name is Bother Phil.
Bother Phil.
Yes,
all right.
Bother Phil.
Okay. All right. We could do a whole show on Bother Phil. Let's take that notes for a future show. Bother Phil.
Yes,
all
clown
right.
ministry.
Clown ministry. Very good. Well, listen, the reason I said we have these two guests with us because of their work in the church, but also this is a particular important time of year, and every year is an election year. But whenever there's a national election that involves the presidency and other significant things, there's always lots of conversation and debate of the crossroads that happen, the intersection of faith and religion with politics and government and policy and so forth. One of the things the church does is it has an agency who helps guide us that way, and that's called the Catholic Conference of Kentucky. And we also, one of the big pieces of the work of the local church is to be part of the voice. And Father Bill does that with the moral side of the news. So this is part of our regular work, but not everybody sees that or knows that as well. So we'll first talk about that work, and then we'll get specifically into what's happening in 2024. So Jason, get us started. What is the Catholic Conference of Kentucky, and what does it do? You probably get asked that a lot.
Yeah, I do indeed. Yeah, the Catholic Conference is the cooperative effort of the 4 Kentucky bishops, so the Archbishop of Louisville and the bishops of Covington, Lexington, and Owensboro. And our primary role, among a few other responsibilities, is to be the public policy voice, advocacy voice for the bishops. And so we have a presence in Frankfurt where, and in cooperation with the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops at the federal level, we express the church's viewpoint on matters of public importance in the public square. And then, as you mentioned, we also assist the bishops in their role in forming Catholics, faithful Catholics who wish to express their faith through the political process, through their involvement in their communities. Formation of conscience is very important in that. And so in whatever way we can, with our expertise, we assist the bishops in their ministry in that way as well.
People generally say lines like separation of church and state. The church shouldn't even be in these conversations. What's the easy response to that? Or is
well, I don't know if there's an easy one, but I think to the extent the church shouldn't have maybe a special role that other folks don't have, that might be fair. But we are not the bishops, and every lay Catholic is just as much a citizen with the responsibility to their community and their country as anyone else. And so our viewpoints, we believe just as we need to give a fair hearing to all people of goodwill, we hope that all people of goodwill give a hearing to our positions and our reasoning as well. And we hope to influence that ongoing debate just along with everyone else.
Archbishop Kurtz used to love to say, you should be a citizen of the heaven and of earth.
That's right.
So very good, very good. Just a kind of a quippy question for you here. Does the state legislature listen to you and to the church?
So they listen, I would say. I think that, obviously we are one voice among many. Yeah. One thing I do think we have a respect that I wouldn't say is unique, but that is probably rare in the sense that most legislators know that we're not partisan and that we don't engage in campaigns. And I mean, on one hand, that might reduce our leverage in a certain way, but it does give us access or a hearing, I guess I should say, because they know we're not going to come out in their next campaign and slam them over something or be involved in for or against, them or their opponents. And so I do think that gives us a hearing and a level of respect that we're there for the issues and our principles and not to try to help particular candidates win and lose.
Okay. Father Bill, you interact with other religious leaders on the moral side of the news, and of course other settings. What do you see as what do you hear about the political process in the church?
Well, I think it is important, as again building on some of what Jason was just saying too, that as citizens we are to bring our unique perspective. And this is individually unique. And there's a Catholic perspective that we try to cultivate in terms of sharing that perspective with others, and that's developed over time. But like in moral side of the news, the premise of it is that different members of other religious traditions, and it could be other Christian churches, but also we frequently have a Jewish member, and we also have in the past have had people of the Muslim faith as well. And to bring our individual perspectives to something that's going on in the news currently. That's the one kind of rule of thumb. Whenever we do gather together once a month, that I am on. It's a weekly news show, but I'm on once a month, rotating the Catholic chair, okay. The Catholic seat. But we do find ourselves frequently talking about, or wanting to talk about the same issue as we get started. We don't get to pick the topics. The station that promotes the moral side of the news is one that actually picks the topics. But as we're coming into those sessions together, I find it's very respectful, and we do typically find ourselves giving and taking, learning from each other and their particular unique perspective, but we all try to bring a faith perspective to it. And that's the thing I think is critical for us, whether it's in the state, national, or local politics, that our faith should inform our decisions. It should. And they say, there's a reference you made to, keep the church out of politics. But it is, for me, a faith perspective that when things are wrong, I should be working to promote the either goodness or the wrongness of that particular type of choices people are making. For me, speeding is a moral decision. Because if I'm speeding in traffic, I'm either putting myself or other people at risk. So you would think, well, speeding, what's church got to say about speeding? I think pick a very simple example.
Sure.
But our faith impacts that, and it should impact us. And caring for the needy. We get that from the gospel, but all of faith traditions talk about caring for the needy. So one of our church's things is to respect holiness and goodness wherever it's found.
Of course, the challenge there is it's easy if everything was right versus wrong. We should do right. The problem is there's a lot of things in that spectrum.
Yes.
Okay, well, the topic for today I really want to get into is to talk about the elections. We're in we're coming into the fall here. It's presidential election season, and talk about what the church involvement in voting and public affairs, much of which is guided by a document the U.S. bishops publish entitled "Forming Consciences for Faithful Citizenship." Jason, you go first on this one. How would you describe the basic stance the church takes about voting and political activity?
Well, the church first says that, political involvement, according to our state in life, is an obligation. It's part of the love of neighbor that we have. The way we organize our communities does have an impact on ourselves, our families, and our neighbor, and so it is one of those ways that we exercise the virtue of charity. And that we should, when we engage in activities such as voting, we should exercise both a healthy detachment in the sense that we should not be caught up in and overwhelmed by secular political allegiances. We should be guided first and foremost by our consciences and our moral formation that we receive through the church. And so we should exercise prudential judgment and see our political involvement, including our voting, as a way to love our neighbor.
Jason, your first part of that statement was it's an obligation. So we're obliged to be involved in political activity?
Yeah, I don't think that means everybody needs to be actively engaged in a political job or in a political volunteer effort all the time, but it does mean that we have an obligation when it comes to, with our state in life, our ability to influence how our communities, local, state, national, are organized. And we should care and be moved by the fact that there's injustice or whatever it may be that we see in our communities that needs to be addressed. And our political activity can be part of how we address that and therefore how we love our neighbor.
So the obligation is to respond to the human condition, what's going on in the world,
exactly.
People's lives.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, Father Bill, what does it mean?
Say along that line, I just build on that a little bit. For me, it's a faith-based obligation. I'm obligated to care for the common good. There's an obligation of discipleship. Mm-hmm. If I'm going to be a disciple and follower of Jesus, I'm obligated to feed the poor. Because Jesus said, when you're doing that, you're feeding me.
Yeah.
So that's like a moral obligation I have if I'm going to choose to follow the gospel.
Right.
So that's maybe the answer to what I was going to ask you about. Yes. How would you define faithful citizenship?
Well, for me, a faithful citizenship is no different than being a faithful disciple.
Okay.
If you're going to be a follower of Jesus, then you are, in a sense, morally obligated to be a good disciple, as Jesus taught us and particularly given us an example. Again, the way he treated people who were those who are not watching but are on podcasting. I'm using my fingers to do quotation marks, that we are obligated, those who are not our own. Yeah. We do not take care of ourselves first as disciples. And if we're going to follow Jesus, then we have to be concerned for the things that he was concerned for.
In this country and frankly around the world, politics can often be contentious and is fraught with popularly called polarization these days. People are defined by fringes, or the either end of the spectrum is what I'd rather call it, more than by a code or a reflection process, perhaps. And I think forming consciences for faithful citizenship, the bishop's document, calls us to rise above that polarization. Now, this is not the perfect format on the podcast to unpack the whole bishop's statement, but I thought I'd ask each of you to share a couple of insights from the tradition of the church, from the bishop's document, that should guide Catholics in 2024. So maybe we'll go back and forth. Each of you name one. We'll go back and forth for a couple. Father Bill, get us started.
Well, I think one of the things that they talk about in the document, but also it's very scripture-based, is the dignity of all human beings. Every human being, from the moment of conception to natural death, should be always treated with the dignity that comes from being, for what we also say, a child of God. It's not just Christians who are children of God, but every human being is a child of God. We are all made in God's image and likeness. The phrase is imago Dei, image of God. And that, given that principle, what happens to any human being should be a concern of mine. Not just, again, my family by blood, but I always like to talk about, at least from a Christian perspective, the family by water, by baptismal water, but the family of all humanity. So that, I think, is an important perspective we should bring. Every human being, not just mine and my family, but every human being, not just my country, but every human being, should be treated with the respect that I give to my own.
Very good. Jason, an insight.
Well, you mentioned the polarization and the way we get drawn into the two sides, and I think that is probably the greatest challenge for Catholics to be truly faithful citizens, because it is so hard to avoid that happening to us when we engage in any kind of political action or discussion. So I would say one of the things the bishops stress in the current introductory note to faithful citizenship, is they mention St. Paul's letter to the Ephesians, and where he says to avoid bitterness, anger, harsh words, slander, and malice. And that gets back to that idea of detachment I had before. That I'll often say when I speak about this, I'll often get the response that, well, the other side doesn't do it.
Yeah.
And I think what we have to remember as Catholics is that we aren't called to respond in kind to what anybody else says. We're called to model our Lord, and we're called to practice virtue, and we're called to show the fruits of the Spirit in all of our interactions. And so we should be leaders in that. And we can be very clear and straightforward and firm on our convictions, while at the same time always responding in charity, trying to assume the best in others, trying to see where they're coming from. The trick to that, too, is that that's actually more effective than just yelling back and forth, too. So that's a little bonus, even though that may not be the most important thing.
I dare say promoters of political commercials don't see it that way.
Yeah. Well, just to build on that concept, too, I just thought of a scripture passage that basically it's the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But so oftentimes we want to respond, do unto others as they do to me.
Or as we're worried they may do unto us.
Or worried that they may, yeah. So we're going to respond to them rather than what we want. We should do what we want done for us, and not what does happen to us.
Father Bill, you got another part of the faithful citizen document you can
I think it does talk about, and I think it's very important, is the role of conscience in making those decisions, but emphasis on properly formed conscience. And the importance is for all of us to become more well-read, to look for the variety of perspectives, and then to, with our conscience, discern it properly. And so, for instance, things that, you can go to the scriptures to help form your conscience, but Jesus didn't talk about nuclear armaments. But he did talk about aggression. He did talk about. So there are things that are ongoing right now, things like genetic research and things like that, genetic engineering. I mean, there's lots of things that we need to inform our conscience based on our scripture tradition, but also the ongoing insights that come to us through we believe, the prompting, the direction of the Holy Spirit, and that the Church's teaching is always in need of updating to address new and evolving concerns. Artificial intelligence. Just we keep on going. But those are things that we should be involved in as good citizens, but we can't always just rely on our past teaching.
So conscience isn't just something we do once.
Right. It's ongoing conscience formation. It's very critical on all the matters that are out there. And that, I think, is very critical for all people and all citizens.
Jason, something else from the document.
Yeah, one of the major principles, I mentioned this before, but in faithful citizenship and in the Church's teaching overall is prudential judgment. And one way that gets applied, I think, is when it's applied well, is that it carries with it a certain humility when it comes to the complexity of a lot of political and policy issues and economic issues, social issues. That's kind of the world I work in, is policy, advocacy, and development. And it's amazing how many times you think you have a very clearly correct, grounded position, only to discover after something's implemented that doesn't work out the way you thought. And also something you think is going to be a disaster might not work out as badly as you had feared. And so I think we need as Catholics to have a certain humility, to understand things are complicated, to be prayerful and thoughtful, and to read up on things before we take too strong of a position, as Father Bill said. And also the final part of that too, I think, and this goes back to that idea of detachment. When we vote, which is, I say one aspect of our political involvement, we have to pick a candidate in each race and vote for that person. Sometimes that person's going to win and sometimes they're going to lose. And whatever happens, we still need to pray for and try to work as best we can with whoever wins, whether they were our person we voted for or not. Because it's always going to be the case, I hope, that even if you voted for somebody, you're not going to follow lockstep and agree with every single thing they do. You will likely have disagreements if you're operating from an independent principle and not just as politics as a team sport. But then also when somebody you didn't vote for wins, they may be, have negative policy positions in a lot of ways, but hopefully there's a few things that they can do that you can support. And that's typically the case, and I think that's the attitude Catholics should at least try to pursue, because we have the blessing and the opportunity to help choose our leaders, but we also understand that this is all within the providence of God, and we need to pray for whoever's in authority, and try to work with them as much as we can and stand up to them when we have to, whether we voted for them or against them.
Well, there's lots of language that flows out there that pushes against some of the principles.
Yes.
Okay, so as I prepare to decide advocacy role or enter the voting booth, whichever way we want to look at this, anything else the bishop's document might tell us to think about that strikes you?
I think one of the things that comes to mind, again, is we've been alluding to it, but making sure that language is used, the concept of solidarity, of common good.
Common good.
Yeah, that, and it's just building on some of what Jason was saying there as well, that where you can find agreement to move things forward. Again, a lot of times the way ministerial associations work, is one thing I'm directly involved in, local area, is that where we can pool our resources to advance a special need of care, helping with utility bills or helping with people who are struggling with their rent. That's what a lot of area community ministries do. Or providing food, for those who are in emergency situations. We do it by pooling our resources where we can. We can't, merge our churches together. We can't do a lot of things where we just go into a pool of just stuff, but that we're focusing it. And so that's in the political realm, as we're seeing that even if our candidate that we have supported wasn't elected, there are things we can still work together for the good. And then by getting in the room, you can still influence people. Mm-hmm. And that's the way the Moral Side of the News works. Again, we all come together, and we have such respect for each other that even when we have a difference of opinion, we always leave that room after that 30 minutes of discussion, shaking hands, smiling at each other, because we are committed to those principles of working for the common good of everyone.
Okay, Jason. So after this forming conscience reflection here, what then are the issues that we should reflect on to inform ourselves as we move into the election time?
Well, as I said before, the church kind of proceeds from general principles, but when we get down to actual, issues that are current today, most people know the church's advocacy in regards to the sanctity of life, the unborn, the death penalty. Also, we, think about everything from gun violence, those principles of the dignity of the human person. Also extend out to questions of access to health care, to safe communities, to the plight of migrants. All of these things have moral implications. The bishops have often said that every budget is a moral document because we're making decisions about where money is spent. We're choosing priorities, spending money here instead of there. And so there's really nothing without some level of moral importance, although, of course, some issues are more clearly of great moral import than others. But I think as Catholics we should, this goes back to that prudential judgment idea, that we need to understand that their things are complex and have a certain humility, but also advocate for principles that need to be centered as these decisions are being made.
And in this particular election, the bishops are asking us and thinking about the issue of education choice.
Thank you for that. Yes, I definitely wanted to mention that there is a constitutional amendment on the ballot this fall in Kentucky that would, as response to a court decision where a scholarship tax credit bill that we had supported got struck down because of the state constitutional language. And so this amendment would open that door so that the legislature could adopt programs like that. So we view that as very important for the future of education in Kentucky.
Yeah.
I think another area too. I know this is a concern for the bishop and concern for the Pope too, is care for creation. We need to care for all human beings, but the earth is also given to us in our stewardship by God, and what's happening around the world, not just in our local communities, with climate change, with care for the earth, is a limited resource ultimately, and so it is important for us to care for what God has entrusted to our care of the earth. And so I know that's another concern that we need to be mindful of, going forward.
So let's get real practical, Father Bill. It's
Okay.
after Mass on Sunday. Parishioner walks up to you and say, all right, Father Bill, all these people, these sound bites on television, these ads, I keep hearing these things. So who am I supposed to vote for?
Well, first of all, I'm not going to answer that question directly, because depending on what election they're talking about. Is it a local election, national election? But first thing I would talk with them is to say, well, what is most important to you? What are the things that you're most concerned about? And listening to them, I'd help them to try to discern who would be able to best respond to that. But I also think I'd take the opportunity to say, if I sense, don't forget this concern or don't neglect this concern as well. And that it is important for us to, again, keep in mind as we're forming our conscience and how to vote, the depth and the width of what the church is calling us to be as good disciples. So it is consider this, consider that, and then go home and pray about it. Pray about it. It's very important because the Spirit will guide us individually and collectively. So to turn that over to the Lord and see what then comes to the forefront after you've prayed over it.
Same question of the Catholic Conference. All right, in the state of Kentucky, the 4 bishops are telling me what to do. Well, they're not really telling me what to do. What am I supposed to do?
Well, other than Amendment 2, which I hope everyone votes for, we often get questions from people asking us to produce voter guides or other things. And the challenge with a voter guide is that it's really hard to do without actually, people think it's spreading information or helping people, but it's very hard to do without guiding people towards particular candidates or confusing which issues are more important. You have to list issues. You have to choose well to list them, what order to list them. And that is not relying on a voter guide or for someone else to tell you how to vote is avoiding one's responsibility to become a faithful citizen. What the bishops want to do is help folks understand issues of importance, how moral principles relate to political issues, and then politics, which is the province of the laity primarily, are to take those teachings and those formed consciences and apply them in political decision making, including voting. And so that's what the bishops are calling people to do, is to make a little bit of effort according to where you are and your ability to do so, to engage in politics. One very practical suggestion that I would make is as we all know, the presidential election takes up a tremendous amount of oxygen, and we spend a lot of time talking about it. In my experience, most people have pretty strong opinions about who they're supposed to vote for in the presidential election. I would encourage you, all of the listeners, to take a step away from the presidential election and look down ballot. I can tell you, my work in Frankfurt, the folks we have representing us in the state legislature, that is hugely important for our lives, for what the law is in Kentucky, where our tax dollars are spent, what the policy is at the state level. So many decisions are made at that level by the legislature. And so also, too, your vote has way more influence at the state legislative or in your local races, the races in your local communities. It's not unusual for a few dozen to a couple hundred votes to be the difference in an outcome in those races. And so I would encourage that as a way to get away from the presidential race and really focus on things where a family, a local neighborhood can make a huge difference in the direction of their community and of their state.
Both those are great responses, Father Bill. It's be prepared.
Yes,
Prepare yourself,
yes.
Form your conscience, but understand, study what's important to you.
And pray over it.
And pray over it. Mm-hmm. And Jason, see the whole picture. Right. Not just don't get caught in one particular conversation or competition. What is the whole picture? Okay, last question. What gifts does the churches worldwide? The church historically has been through lots of centuries of political strife around the world, and part of it. What would you summarize this? What gift does the church then bring to this political arena?
Well, I think you said it. The church's longevity as an institution, the depth of her thought over the centuries. St. Augustine in the City of God talks about a migration crisis in the Roman Empire, and that the Christians were being blamed in some ways for various things. And these issues are recurrent. The church has been through this before. The church is engaged with so many types of governments: democratic, authoritarian, medieval feudal systems. I mean, everything you can think of, and all of this experience, the gospel, the great Christian thinkers through the ages, papal teaching, all of this kind of informs the church's approach to the political order. And I would challenge anyone to find an institution with more depth and experience than the Catholic Church.
Good.
And I think even on the local level, at the parish level, there is a sense in which I think we can model that quality of commitment and sense of family that's called to be as a disciple. That we are called to be the family of God and live out that way. Because there's always a diversity of opinions within any parish community. I think that is one of the gifts that the Catholic Church particularly brings, is that we're like that big tent. We do try to bring everybody in. There's certainly traditions when in the past you just break off and form a like-minded community. Well, that's not what we're called to do, of like-minded, like thinking, but we are to work together in collaboration and keep, together with everyone working at that. And that's one of the goals of every parish is too. And certainly every parish budget is also a moral statement. Yeah. And what you value, what you prioritize. And so to keep working with those with whom you are committed to in faith, in the Eucharist, coming together to pray together, that's all part of my family. And it's not just a family of blood, but the family of water. We use that image, the family of God, to which we're all part of. And keep modeling. We're in this together as we go forward, whether I agree with this or that completely. I'm in this with you, and I need you to be in it with me.
The work both of you do is a wonderful resource for our local church. I thank you both for being here today on part of this podcast, for the work you do each day. Father Bill, as pastor, as moral side of the news, as many committees you serve on in the church, we're very grateful to you. Jason, the statewide challenges are immense, and you're a wonderful voice for the Church of Kentucky, Catholic Church in Kentucky, and we're grateful for the work you do every day. So I'm grateful for your presence. I encourage all of our viewers then and listeners to think about how you can become faithful citizens. Help our communities participate with more civil discourse and be productive in the election process. There's a lot of strife sometimes. Maybe we could at least all add civil discourse to the process in these coming weeks ahead. And remember to vote this November. Thank you for joining us on this edition of What's New in ArchLou, and see you again next month.